The dog refused to enter. Sarah stood in her doorway, rain-soaked children clinging to her legs, watching Ranger's body go rigid at the threshold. His ears flattened. A low growl rumbled from somewhere deep in his chest, a sound she'd never heard before. Ethan wailed in her arms. Jacob whispered, "Mommy, I'm scared." Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The house looked exactly as she'd left it that morning. Same worn couch, same family photos on the wall, same creaking floorboards. But Ranger knew what she couldn't see, and in 3 minutes Sarah would discover why her loyal dog had suddenly become terrified of home. Before we begin this journey together, I want to ask something important. If emotional stories like this one touch your heart, please subscribe to our channel. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers so we can continue bringing you these powerful, real-life tales. Your support means everything. Now, let's step into Sarah's world. The morning light filtered through threadbare curtains, casting pale shadows across Sarah Mitchell's bedroom. She'd been awake for hours, awake before dawn broke, before the birds started their chorus, before Springfield stirred to life. Sleep had become a stranger since the funeral 6 months ago. Her hand instinctively reached across the bed, touching cool sheets where warmth used to be. The emptiness hit her chest like a physical blow, the same way it did every morning. She closed her eyes and counted to 10, a technique the grief counselor had suggested. It never worked. From down the hall, she heard Ethan stirring in his crib. The 1-year-old's soft whimpers pulled her from bed, her bare feet touching the cold hardwood floor. The house was always cold now, no matter how high she turned the thermostat. Some coldness, she'd learned, had nothing to do with temperature. Sarah lifted Ethan from his crib, his small body warm and trusting against her chest. His chubby fingers grabbed at her hair, and for a moment, just a brief, merciful moment, the weight in her chest lightened. These children were her reason to keep moving, keep breathing, keep pretending the world hadn't shattered. "Good morning, sweet boy," she whispered, kissing his forehead. He smelled like baby soap and innocence, untouched by the tragedy that had reshaped their lives. Downstairs, Ranger lifted his head from where he lay near the front door. The golden retriever had belonged to her husband, a loyal companion who now seemed as lost as the rest of them. Lately, though, something had changed in the dog. He'd started sleeping by the door instead of his usual spot by the fireplace. Sarah had noticed but dismissed it as grief. Could dogs grieve? She thought so. Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in her school uniform, her dark hair neatly braided. 7 years old, and she'd become the little adult of the house, helping without being asked, never complaining, carrying a sadness in her eyes that no child should know. "I made Jacob brush his teeth," Emily announced quietly, as if afraid to disturb the morning's fragile peace. "Thank you, sweetheart." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "You don't have to do everything, you know. You can just be a kid." Emily shrugged, pouring herself cereal with practiced efficiency. "I like helping." The statement hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain. Sarah turned away, focusing on preparing Ethan's bottle, blinking back tears that threatened constantly these days. She couldn't break down. Not now. Not in front of them. Jacob shuffled in, his dinosaur pajamas wrinkled, his eyes still sleepy. At 5, he'd stopped talking as much after his father died. The pediatrician said it was normal, that children processed grief differently. But Sarah worried. She worried about everything now. Every cough, every quiet moment, every shadow that seemed too dark. "Morning, buddy," she said, ruffling his hair. He leaned into her touch but said nothing, climbing into his chair and accepting the plate of toast she offered. The morning routine unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance: breakfast, backpacks, shoes, last-minute searches for lost homework. Sarah moved through it mechanically, her body knowing what to do even when her mind felt foggy with exhaustion. As she gathered the children to leave, Ranger approached the door, but hesitated. His ears perked up, head tilting as if listening to something beyond human hearing. He sniffed the air near the entrance to the hallway, his body language shifting from relaxed to alert. "Come on, boy," Sarah called, opening the door. "Outside." But Ranger didn't move immediately. He stared down the hallway leading to the bedrooms, a low rumble building in his throat. Then, as if remembering his training, he trotted out the door. Sarah frowned but dismissed it. Maybe he'd heard a mouse in the walls. Old houses had those problems. The drive to school was quiet. Emily stared out the window, Jacob clutched his backpack, and Ethan dozed in his car seat. Sarah's mind wandered to bills piled on the kitchen counter, to the part-time job she'd started last month that barely covered expenses, to the constant fear that she wasn't enough. Not enough mother, not enough provider, not enough of anything. "Mommy," Emily's voice was small, "do you think Daddy can see us?" The question struck like lightning. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel, her throat constricting. I think he's always with us, sweetie, watching over us." "Then why does the house feel so different at night?" Sarah glanced at her daughter in the rearview mirror. "What do you mean?" Emily shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "I don't know. It just feels like someone's watching, but not Daddy, someone else." A chill ran down Sarah's spine, but she forced a smile. "It's just an old house, honey. Old houses make strange sounds. There's nothing to worry about." But even as she said it, Sarah remembered Ranger's behavior that morning. The way he'd stared down the hallway, the way he'd been sleeping by the door every night, the way he sometimes growled at nothing. She shook off the feeling. Grief did strange things to perception, made you see threats where none existed, made you afraid of shadows. After dropping the children at school, Sarah returned home with Ethan. The house stood before her, a two-story structure with peeling white paint and a sagging porch, nestled in a quiet Springfield neighborhood where everyone knew everyone. It had been their dream home once. Now it felt like a museum of memories she couldn't escape. As she unlocked the door, Ranger pushed past her, entering cautiously. He stopped just inside, nostrils flaring, body tense. For several long seconds, he didn't move. Then slowly, deliberately, he walked to his spot by the door and lay down, eyes fixed on the dark hallway leading to the back of the house. Sarah watched him, unease creeping up her spine like cold fingers. Something had changed. She felt it in her bones. In the way the silence seemed heavier than usual, but she had laundry to do, a baby to care for, a life to somehow keep together. She couldn't have known that in 48 hours, Ranger's instincts would save all their lives. The changes started so subtly that Sarah almost missed them entirely. It was the small things first, the way Ranger positioned himself differently in the house, as if conducting a silent patrol. Where he once sprawled lazily in patches of afternoon sunlight, now he kept watch. His favorite spot by the fireplace lay abandoned. Instead, he claimed the space directly in front of the door, his body forming a barrier between the entrance and the rest of the house. Sarah noticed but didn't question it. Dogs had their quirks, their unexplainable preferences. Maybe he was guarding them, protecting the family in the only way he knew how after losing his master. The thought brought her a strange comfort. At least someone was watching over them. But Ranger's vigil went deeper than simple loyalty. At night, when the house settled into darkness and the children slept, the dog would lift his head at sounds Sarah couldn't hear. His ears would rotate like radar dishes, tracking something invisible. Sometimes, in the dead hours between midnight and dawn, she'd wake to find him standing rigid in the hallway, staring toward the back bedrooms, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. "What is it, boy?" she'd whisper, her voice barely audible in the oppressive silence. Ranger would glance at her, then return his attention to the shadows. After several minutes, he'd relax and pad back to his post by the door, circling 3 times before lying down with a heavy sigh. Sarah told herself it was nothing. Old houses were full of sounds, settling foundations, wind in the eaves, branches scraping against windows. Springfield nights were quiet, and in that quiet every creak became amplified, every whisper of movement became suspicious. The second week after Ranger's behavior changed, Emily began having nightmares. Sarah would find her daughter standing in her doorway at 2 in the morning, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide and frightened. "I heard footsteps," Emily would say, "in the hallway." "Just the house settling, sweetheart," Sarah would respond, leading her back to bed, tucking blankets around her small body. "Old houses make noises. You're safe, I promise." But Emily's expression held doubt, as if she knew something her mother refused to acknowledge. Jacob, too, became increasingly withdrawn. During dinner one evening, he pushed peas around his plate, his usual appetite gone. When Sarah asked what was wrong, he looked up with those serious 5-year-old eyes and said, "The house doesn't feel right anymore." "What do you mean, buddy?" "It feels different when the sun goes away." Sarah's chest tightened. Emily had said something similar, but children were impressionable, feeding off each other's fears. They were all grieving, all adjusting to life without their father. It made sense that the house would feel different. Everything felt different now. She forced brightness into her voice. "It's the same house, Jacob. Nothing's changed." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah felt their hollowness. Something had changed. She felt it too, though she couldn't name it. A heaviness that descended with darkness. A sensation of being observed when she knew she was alone. A prickling awareness that made her check door locks twice, 3 times even when she'd just checked them. One afternoon, while Ethan napped and the older children were at school, Sarah stood in the kitchen washing dishes. Ranger lay at his post, but his body was tense, muscles coiled. His gaze remained fixed on the hallway entrance. Sarah dried her hands and walked toward him. "What's got you so worked up?" The dog didn't acknowledge her. His focus remained absolute, unwavering. She followed his line of sight down the hallway. Nothing. Just the familiar corridor leading to bedrooms, the same worn carpet, the same family photos on walls, the same closed doors. Yet Ranger stared, as if watching an intruder invisible to human eyes. Sarah's skin prickled. She found herself holding her breath, listening. The house was silent except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and Ethan's soft breathing from upstairs through the baby monitor. "You're being ridiculous," she muttered to herself, turning back to the kitchen. "There's nothing there." But Ranger knew differently. His instincts, honed through thousands of years of evolution, detected what Sarah's civilized senses missed. He smelled something that didn't belong, a scent that appeared and disappeared like smoke, strongest during daylight hours when the family was away. That night, Sarah lay in bed, unable to sleep. Ethan dozed peacefully in his crib beside her, one tiny fist curled near his face. The monitor from the children's rooms showed Emily and Jacob sleeping soundly. Everything appeared normal, yet her heart raced. She'd begun noticing other small things that didn't quite add up. A kitchen chair pulled slightly away from the table when she was certain she'd pushed it in. A cabinet door ajar that she remembered closing. The faint smell of cigarette smoke sometimes, even though no one in the house smoked and she never allowed smoking inside. Each incident was minor, easily explained away. Memory lapses. Forgetfulness brought on by grief and exhaustion. But together, they formed a pattern her conscious mind refused to see while her subconscious screamed warnings. Downstairs, Ranger began to growl. Sarah froze, every nerve ending alert. The growl was different from his usual sounds, deeper, more primal, more urgent. She grabbed her phone, crept to the bedroom door, and peered down the dark staircase. Ranger stood at the base of the stairs, hackles raised, teeth bared, staring at the hallway. His growl intensified, becoming almost a roar in the silent house. "Ranger!" Sarah's voice shook. "What is it?" The dog didn't respond, didn't break his stance. For 30 seconds, that felt like 30 minutes, he maintained his aggressive posture. Then, as suddenly as it began, he stopped. His body relaxed. He sniffed the air one final time, circled, and lay down. Sarah's hands trembled as she returned to bed. She checked the locks on her phone's security app, all doors sealed, all windows latched. Nothing had entered the house. Nothing could have entered the house. But something had definitely been there. Emily had been right. The house did feel different after dark. Heavier, more oppressive, as if the walls themselves held secrets. And Ranger knew. He'd been trying to tell them, trying to warn them, using the only language he had. Sarah pulled Ethan's crib closer to her bed and kept the lights on until dawn broke. The audience watching Sarah's ignorance could see what she couldn't. Danger wasn't coming. Danger was already there, hidden in plain sight, waiting with the patience of a predator who'd found the perfect hunting ground. And in just 3 days, Ranger would refuse to enter the house at all. The rain started as a whisper against the windows, then grew into a steady drumbeat that matched the rhythm of Sarah's anxious heart. Thursday afternoon had arrived grey and unwelcoming, the kind of weather that made Springfield feel smaller, more claustrophobic. Sarah navigated her aging minivan through flooded streets, windshield wipers struggling against the deluge. In the back seat, Emily and Jacob sat quiet, watching water stream down the glass. Ethan fussed in his car seat, disturbed by the storm's percussion. The elementary school pickup had taken longer than usual, parents moving slowly in the rain, children reluctant to leave the dry building. By the time Sarah pulled into their driveway, her nerves were frayed, her patience worn thin by another day of holding everything together with sheer willpower. "Stay close to me," she instructed, unbuckling Ethan while Emily and Jacob huddled under her umbrella. The three of them made a clumsy procession to the front door, shoes squelching through puddles, rain soaking through jackets despite their best efforts. Sarah fumbled with her keys, rain pelting her face, Ethan wailing in her arms. Finally, the lock clicked. She pushed the door open, expecting warmth and shelter. Ranger met them at the threshold, but he didn't greet them with his usual tail wag or gentle nuzzle. Instead, he stood perfectly still, his body blocking the entrance, every muscle locked tight. His ears lay flat against his skull, his lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth. "Ranger, move," Sarah said, trying to step around him. The dog didn't budge. He took 2 steps forward, crossing the threshold onto the porch, his nose working the air. Sarah watched, confusion mixing with irritation, as Ranger sniffed deeply, once, twice, 3 times. His entire body went rigid. Then he backed away from the door. Before we continue with what happened next, I need to pause and ask for your help. If you're invested in Sarah's story, if you want to see how this family survives what's coming, please hit that subscribe button. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support allows us to keep sharing these powerful true stories. Now back to that terrifying moment on the porch. Sarah's irritation dissolved into something colder. Ranger had never refused to enter the house. Never. Rain or shine, summer or winter, he'd always bounded through that door eager for shelter and food. "What's wrong with him?" Emily asked, her voice small and frightened. "I don't know, sweetie." Sarah's arms ached from holding Ethan, rain soaking through to her skin. "Ranger, come, inside now." The dog took another step backward, his retreat deliberate and unmistakable. His eyes remained fixed on the dark hallway visible beyond the entrance. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest, not aggressive toward them, but warning them, protecting them. The sound raised every hair on Sarah's arms. Jacob pressed against her leg. "Mommy, I don't want to go in either." "Don't be silly." But Sarah's voice lacked conviction. She stared past Ranger into her own home, and for the first time it looked foreign, threatening. The familiar living room seemed darker than it should be, shadows pooling in corners where afternoon light usually reached. Ethan's crying intensified, his small body rigid with distress. The baby was picking up on the tension, feeding off the fear that rippled through all of them. Sarah's mind raced. Could there be a gas leak? Carbon monoxide? Was that why Ranger refused to enter? But she'd just had the furnace inspected last month. The smoke detectors were new. Everything should be fine. Should be. But Ranger's behavior screamed otherwise. "Stay here," Sarah commanded, setting Ethan in Emily's arms on the covered porch. "Don't move." She stepped past Ranger into the house, her heart hammering against her ribs. The air felt normal, no strange smells, no obvious dangers. She flicked on the hallway light. Nothing. Just the same worn carpet, the same family photos, the same closed bedroom doors. Behind her, Ranger whined, a desperate, pleading sound she'd never heard from him before. Sarah moved deeper into the house, checking rooms methodically. Living room empty, kitchen undisturbed. She climbed the stairs, each creak of wood making her flinch. The bedrooms were exactly as they'd left them that morning. Beds made, toys scattered, nothing out of place. She returned to the front door where her children waited, drenched and frightened. Ranger remained on the porch, refusing to cross the threshold, his entire posture radiating distress. "There's nothing there," Sarah said, but doubt crept into her voice. If there was nothing there, why did her hands shake? Why did her breath come too fast? Why did every instinct scream at her to grab her children and run? Emily clutched Ethan tighter. "Mum, Ranger knows something." "Dogs can sense things we can't," Jacob added quietly, his 5-year-old wisdom cutting through Sarah's rational denials. Sarah looked at her dog, loyal, trained, calm Ranger, and saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not confusion, not illness, fear. The kind of fear that came from recognizing real danger. A memory surfaced, a news story she'd half-watched months ago about a dog in Kansas City who'd refused to let his family enter their home. They'd called police, who discovered an armed intruder hiding in a closet. The dog had saved them. Sarah's blood ran cold. She pulled out her phone, her fingers numb. "We're not staying here tonight." "What?" Emily looked confused. "Why?" "Just trust me, honey." Sarah's voice shook as she herded the children back toward the van. "We're going to Grandma's house. Right now." But first, she needed to know. Needed to understand what Ranger sensed. Needed to prove to herself she wasn't crazy, wasn't overreacting, wasn't letting grief and paranoia destroy her judgment. She called her neighbor, David, a retired contractor who'd helped with small repairs around the house. He arrived within 10 minutes, concerned by the urgency in her voice. "Something's wrong," Sarah explained, rain streaming down both their faces. "Ranger won't go inside. He's never done this before." David studied the dog, then the house. "You think there's someone in there?" The question, spoken aloud, made it real, made it terrifying. "I don't know, but something's not right." David grabbed a flashlight from his truck. "Call the police. I'll check it out." But Sarah stopped him. "Wait. Let me look one more time. There has to be a logical explanation." There wasn't, because beneath their feet, hidden in the crawl space under the hallway floorboards, someone had been living, watching, waiting. And tonight, Sarah would finally discover the nightmare that had been unfolding in plain sight. Sarah couldn't sleep that night, even in the safety of her mother's guest room, with the children tucked securely around her. Ethan dozed in a portable crib. Emily and Jacob shared the double bed, and Ranger lay across the doorway like a sentinel finally able to rest. But Sarah's mind wouldn't stop replaying the afternoon, the way Ranger had refused to enter, the terror in her children's eyes, the inexplicable certainty that something was deeply, horrifically wrong with their home. By dawn, she'd made a decision. She would go back. She would search every inch of that house until she found whatever Ranger had sensed, because living in this limbo, this terrible not knowing, was worse than confronting the truth. Her mother agreed to watch the children. David offered to accompany her, bringing his toolbox and a determination that matched her own. They arrived at the house just after 8 in the morning, sunlight making everything seem less threatening than it had in yesterday's storm. Ranger came with them but stopped at the driveway. He sat on the concrete, watching the house with wary eyes, refusing to come closer. "That's not normal," David muttered, studying the dog's behavior. "What does he know that we don't?" They entered through the front door, both tense, both listening for sounds that didn't belong. The house was silent. Sunlight streamed through windows, illuminating dust particles floating in the air. Everything looked ordinary, mundane, safe. But Sarah's skin crawled with awareness. The house felt violated somehow, as if invisible fingerprints marked every surface. "Where do we start?" she asked. David walked slowly through each room, his contractor's eye searching for anomalies. "Look for things out of place, signs of entry, anything that doesn't make sense." They moved through the living room, the kitchen, the bedrooms. Nothing obvious presented itself. Sarah was beginning to doubt her own sanity when David stopped in the hallway, the same hallway Ranger had stared at for weeks, the same hallway where shadows seemed darker than they should be. He knelt, running his hand along the floorboards. "Feel this." Sarah crouched beside him. Under her palm, the wood felt slightly different, looser, less settled than the surrounding floor. "These boards have been moved recently," David said, his voice taking on a grim quality. "See here? Fresh scratches on the edges. Someone's been accessing something underneath." Sarah's heart began to pound. "What's down there?" "Crawl space, probably. Most houses this age have them." David pulled a pry bar from his toolbox. "You sure you want to see?" "No." She didn't want to see. She wanted to run, to pretend, to preserve the illusion that her home was still safe. But her children deserved better than a mother who hid from truth. Open it. The first board came up easily. Too easily. It had been removed multiple times, the nails loose, the wood worn from repeated handling. David set it aside and reached for the second board, then the third. A smell wafted up from the darkness below, not decay but human. Sweat, cigarette smoke, the unmistakable scent of someone who'd been living in an enclosed space. Sarah's stomach lurched. Oh God. David pulled out his phone, turning on the flashlight. They both leaned over the opening, peering into the crawl space beneath. What they saw made Sarah's blood turn to ice. A makeshift living area had been constructed in the confined space. A sleeping bag lay rumpled in one corner. Empty food containers were stacked neatly against a support beam. Cigarette butts littered the dirt floor, dozens of them, suggesting weeks or months of occupation. A battery-powered lantern sat beside a collection of tools, screwdrivers, a knife, rope. But worst of all were the photographs, pictures of Sarah and the children, taken through windows, images of Emily walking to the school bus, Jacob playing in the yard, Sarah carrying Ethan from the car, all printed and arranged like trophies along the crawl space wall. Someone had been watching them, studying them, living beneath their feet while they slept above. Sarah's legs gave out. She sat hard on the floor, her vision swimming, bile rising in her throat. The violation was so complete, so absolute, that her mind struggled to process it. "We need to call the police," David said, his voice tight. "Right now. Don't touch anything else." He pulled Sarah away from the opening, guiding her to the living room while he dialed. She sat on the couch, the same couch where she'd watched television, read bedtime stories, lived her life completely unaware that a predator had been underneath, separated only by thin floorboards. The police arrived within minutes. Officers secured the scene, called for investigators, began documenting evidence. Sarah answered questions mechanically, her mind numb with shock. A detective knelt beside the opening, examining the space with a flashlight. When he stood, his expression was grave. "Mrs. Mitchell, this individual has been accessing your home regularly. Based on the evidence, we believe he entered during daylight hours when the family was away. The cigarette butts alone suggest he spent extended periods here." "How long?" Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. "Weeks. Maybe longer." The timeline crashed over her. All those small things she'd dismissed, the moved chair, the open cabinet, the strange smells, all Ranger's warnings she'd ignored. The dog had known. He'd been trying to tell her, trying to protect them, using every means available to him, and she'd told herself it was nothing. "We found identification," another officer said, emerging from the basement with an evidence bag. "The name matches someone we've been looking for in connection with several home invasions in the county. He has a pattern: single mothers, children in the home, houses with easy access to crawl spaces." The words felt distant, disconnected from reality. Sarah's mind kept circling back to one horrifying fact. He'd been there, right there. While they ate dinner above him, while the children slept, while she grieved and struggled and tried desperately to hold their lives together, he'd been watching, waiting, planning something too terrible to imagine. "Your dog saved your lives," the detective said quietly. "If he hadn't refused to enter yesterday, if you'd gone about your normal routine—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Sarah looked out the window to where Ranger sat in the driveway, still refusing to approach the house. Tears streamed down her face, tears of horror, relief, gratitude, and rage. The loyal dog had recognized danger when her human mind rationalized it away. His instincts had screamed warnings, while her civilized sensibilities dismissed them as overreaction, and now the police would reveal just how close her family had come to becoming another tragedy no one could have prevented, except they could have, if only she'd trusted what Ranger knew all along. The investigation consumed the next 48 hours like wildfire through dry grass. Police technicians combed through every inch of the crawl space, photographing evidence, collecting samples, building a case that grew more disturbing with each discovery. Sarah sat in her mother's living room, unable to eat, unable to think beyond the nightmare that had been unfolding beneath her feet. Detective Morrison visited repeatedly, his face growing grimmer with each update. "We've identified him," Morrison said on the second day, settling into the chair across from Sarah. "His name is Marcus Webb, 34 years old. He's been on our radar for 2 years." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm afternoon. 2 years? "He has a pattern. Single mothers with young children. He studies them, learns their routines, their vulnerabilities. Then he finds access to their homes through basements, crawl spaces, anywhere he can hide and observe." Morrison paused, his expression dark. "Mrs. Mitchell, we believe he's connected to 3 disappearances in the county, families that vanished without a trace." The words hit like physical blows. Sarah's vision blurred, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps. 3 families gone, and hers would have been the 4th. "We found plans in the crawl space," Morrison continued, his voice gentle but unflinching. "Detailed notes about your family's schedule, which days you grocery shopped, when the children left for school, when you were home alone with the baby." He leaned forward. "He was preparing for something, Sarah. And your dog's refusal to enter the house that day, it disrupted whatever timeline he'd established." Sarah doubled over, sobs tearing from her throat. All those nights she'd slept peacefully unaware. All those times she'd left the children home while she ran quick errands to the corner store. All those moments when Ethan had napped in his crib, vulnerable and tiny, while a monster crouched in the darkness below. Her mother rushed to her side, holding her while she shook. Emily and Jacob watched from the hallway, their young faces etched with confusion and fear they couldn't fully comprehend. "Where is he now?" Sarah finally managed to ask through her tears. "We're searching. He hasn't returned to your house since you discovered the space. We have officers monitoring the property around the clock." Morrison's jaw tightened. "We'll find him." But the damage was done. Sarah's sense of safety, already fractured by her husband's death, lay shattered beyond recognition. The world had become a place of hidden threats and invisible predators. How could she ever trust her own home again? How could she tuck her children into bed knowing what horrors had been planned in the darkness beneath them? That evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Sarah sat on her mother's back porch staring at nothing. Ranger lay beside her, his head resting on her lap, as if understanding the depth of her anguish. She stroked his fur, her fingers trembling. "You knew," she whispered. "You tried to tell me, and I didn't listen." The dog's brown eyes looked up at her with that ancient wisdom animals possess, an understanding that transcends language, that speaks directly to something primal in the human soul. "I'm so sorry I didn't trust you." Emily appeared in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her small face streaked with tears. "Mommy, are we safe now?" Sarah opened her arms, and Emily ran to her, burrowing into her embrace. Jacob followed moments later, pressing against his mother's other side. They sat together, a family bound by grief and now by survival, while the dog who'd saved them kept his vigil. "We're safe, babies," Sarah said, though her voice cracked. "We're safe because of Ranger." Emily turned to the dog, her 7-year-old face crumpling with emotion. She threw her arms around Ranger's neck, pressing her face into his golden fur. "He kept us safe when no one else knew we were in danger," she sobbed. "He knew, Mummy. He knew." The words broke something loose in Sarah's chest. Not more grief, but gratitude so profound it felt like a physical presence. This loyal creature, this faithful companion her husband had brought into their family, had done what she couldn't. He'd recognized evil when it wore no face. He'd sensed malice when it made no sound. Ranger had saved them with nothing but instinct and unwavering devotion. Jacob stroked the dog's head with small, gentle hands. "Good boy," he whispered. "Best boy." Sarah looked at her children, Emily, Jacob, and Ethan sleeping peacefully inside, and felt the terrible weight of how close she'd come to losing them. The police reports detailed Webb's methods with clinical precision. The other families had trusted their safe neighborhoods, their locked doors, their assumption that monsters announced themselves with obvious threats. But monsters didn't announce themselves. They hid in crawl spaces and shadows. They moved in silence, They waited with patience born of obsession, and the only thing standing between Sarah's family and that fate had been a dog's refusal to ignore what every human instinct told them to dismiss. Over the following weeks, as police continued their manhunt, Sarah began the impossible process of healing. They couldn't return to the house, not yet, maybe not ever. The place that had held their memories now held only terror. But something shifted in Sarah during those dark days. The paralyzing grief that had consumed her since her husband's death began to transform into something else. Fierce protectiveness, determination, a resolve that her children would not only survive, but thrive. Ranger became more than a pet. He became a guardian angel with fur and 4 legs. Where he once had been simply her late husband's dog, he now embodied protection itself. The children treated him with a reverence usually reserved for heroes in storybooks, because that's exactly what he was. Sarah found herself watching Ranger with new understanding. When he alerted to sounds, she listened. When he positioned himself protectively, she paid attention. She'd learned the hardest possible lesson about ignoring instinct, about rationalizing away warnings her civilized mind deemed illogical. A week after the discovery, Detective Morrison called with news. "We apprehended Webb in a motel 40 miles outside Springfield. He's in custody. He won't hurt anyone again." Sarah closed her eyes, relief flooding through her. "Thank you." "Mrs. Mitchell, I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've seen a lot of close calls, but what your dog did, that level of awareness, that persistence in warning you, it's extraordinary." Morrison paused. "You should know that we're using your case in training now. Teaching officers to take animal behavior seriously in home invasion cases. Ranger's story might save other families." After the call ended, Sarah sat with Ranger, her hand resting on his head. The dog looked at her with those wise, gentle eyes, and she understood that some bonds transcended words. Some loyalty ran deeper than human comprehension could measure. Her family would rebuild their lives in a new home, in a new neighborhood. But wherever they went, Ranger would be there, not just as a pet, but as the silent guardian who'd proven that sometimes the truest warning comes not from words, but from a dog who refuses to enter. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of a different house, a ranch-style home on the other side of Springfield, far from the nightmare that had nearly consumed them. The rooms smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. Sunlight poured through large windows, banishing shadows before they could form. Emily and Jacob ran through empty rooms, their laughter echoing off bare walls, the first genuine laughter Sarah had heard from them in months. Ethan toddled behind on unsteady legs, squealing with delight at the adventure of a new space to explore. And Ranger moved through the house methodically, sniffing every corner, every closet, every potential hiding place. His tail wagged. His body remained relaxed. After several minutes of thorough investigation, he returned to Sarah and sat at her feet, looking up at her with calm, approving eyes. The house was safe. He'd checked. She could trust his judgment. Sarah knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Thank you," she whispered into his fur, "for everything." The move had been necessary, not just for practical reasons, but for healing. The old house, despite police clearing it and changing all the locks, remained tainted by violation. Sarah couldn't walk those hallways without imagining Webb crouched beneath the floor, watching through cracks, planning horrors her mind still couldn't fully process. So she'd made the difficult decision to sell, to start fresh, to give her children a home where monsters hadn't lurked in crawl spaces. The new house had been chosen carefully, single level, no basement, no crawl space, large windows that let in abundant light. Her security system Sarah had installed before moving a single piece of furniture, and most importantly it felt right, both to her newly awakened instincts and to Ranger's infallible senses. "Mum, can Ranger sleep in my room?" Emily asked, appearing with flushed cheeks and hopeful eyes. Sarah smiled. "Ranger sleeps where Ranger wants to sleep, but I think he prefers to be near everyone." As if understanding, Ranger walked to the center of the house, the hallway connecting all the bedrooms. He circled 3 times and lay down, positioning himself where he could see every door, every entrance, every potential threat. His chosen post told Sarah everything she needed to know about his continued vigilance. He would never stop protecting them. It was woven into his DNA, into the loyalty that made dogs humanity's oldest and most faithful companions. That night, as Sarah tucked Emily and Jacob into their new beds, Jacob looked up at her with serious eyes. "Are we safe here?" The question deserved honesty, not false reassurance. We're safer because we learn to pay attention, because we listen to warnings, even quiet ones, even ones that don't make sense at first. Emily nodded from her bed across the room. Like how Ranger knew. Exactly like how Ranger knew. Jacob considered this, his 5-year-old mind working through complex concepts of danger and intuition. So if something feels wrong, we should say something, even if grown-ups think we're being silly? Sarah's throat tightened. Always. Your instincts matter, buddy. Your feelings matter. If something feels wrong, you tell me, and I promise I'll listen. It was a promise forged in fire, in the terrible knowledge of what happened when warnings went unheeded. Sarah had learned the hardest possible lesson about the cost of dismissing instinct in favor of rationalization. She would never make that mistake again. Before we conclude this powerful story, I want to thank you for watching until the end. If Sarah's journey touched your heart, if Ranger's bravery inspired you, please subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue bringing these important, real-life lessons to light. Now, let's see how this family story truly ends. Later, when the children slept and the house settled into peaceful silence, Sarah checked on each of them. Emily curled around her stuffed rabbit, face relaxed in genuine rest for the first time in months. Jacob sprawled across his bed, one arm dangling off the edge, and Ethan, precious, vulnerable Ethan, slept in his crib, in the room next to Sarah's, breathing steady and calm. Ranger lay on the floor beside Ethan's crib, his vigil unbroken. He lifted his head as Sarah approached, tail thumping softly against the carpet. "You really love them, don't you?" Sarah whispered, stroking his head. The dog's eyes held that infinite gentleness mixed with unwavering protectiveness. He'd lost his master when Sarah's husband died, but rather than retreat into grief, Ranger had expanded his circle of protection to encompass the whole family with even greater intensity. He'd become their guardian in the truest sense of the word. Sarah sat on the floor beside him, her back against the wall, watching her baby sleep. Moonlight filtered through the window, casting soft illumination across the room. Everything was peaceful, safe, normal. But Sarah had learned that normal was a fragile illusion. That danger often wore no mask and announced itself with no fanfare. That the most terrifying threats moved in silence, hiding in plain sight, waiting for moments of inattention. Marcus Webb had taught her that lesson in the cruelest way possible. But Ranger had taught her something more important, that instinct was humanity's oldest defense system. That the primal awareness animals possessed wasn't something to dismiss, but something to honor. That survival sometimes depended on listening to warnings that made no logical sense. "I'll never ignore you again," Sarah promised quietly, her hand resting on Ranger's warm fur. "When you're uneasy, I'll be uneasy. When you sense danger, I'll believe you. No more rationalization, no more dismissing what I can't immediately explain." It was a vow that extended beyond the dog. Sarah had started trusting her own instincts again, that prickling awareness when something felt wrong, that tightness in her chest that signaled danger, that ancient wisdom the modern world had trained her to suppress. She'd become a different kind of mother, more vigilant, more protective. Less willing to accept societal pressure to be calm and rational when every nerve screamed warnings. Her children would grow up understanding that fear wasn't always irrational, that sometimes fear was the sanest response to legitimate danger, and they would grow up knowing that a dog named Ranger had saved their lives by refusing to ignore what everyone else dismissed. As dawn approached, Sarah finally stood, pressing a kiss to Ethan's forehead. The baby stirred slightly, then settled back into sleep. Ranger watched her with those knowing eyes, and Sarah understood that their bond had transcended the typical relationship between human and animal. They were survivors together, protectors of this small family that had faced darkness and emerged into light. The house was quiet, safe, new, but Sarah would never take that safety for granted again, because she'd learned the truth that most people never discover until it's too late. Sometimes danger makes no sound. It doesn't announce itself with crashing doors or obvious threats. It hides in shadows and crawl spaces. It moves with patience and watches with malice. But instinct always speaks first. And the wisdom to listen, to truly listen, can mean the difference between tragedy and survival.